Hello everybody! Today we are doing another book review. Today we are reviewing Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. This is a young adult sci-fi. For those of you who have not seen my reviews before, I split my reviews into two sections. The first section focuses on the spoiler-free side of things, where I give you a bit of a premise. Then I give you 3 pros and 3 cons about the book in a spoiler-free way. In the second section, I delve into things in a spoilery way, where I get to rave or rant about what I love or what I don't love, or both, in a spoilery way. So let's dive right in and discuss Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. Let's start off with the premise of this book. This book follows a girl by the name of Spencer, who... I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the first chapter, because that's not a spoiler, it's chapter 1. One day, Spencer and her dad are flying around in a spaceship, because Spencer's dad is a fighter on a spaceship. And something ends up happening to him. He tells her to go back, and then he ends up dying. And Spencer is, from then on, told by other people what happened with her father. They say that he was a coward, that he had gone on a mission with all the other fighters, and something happened, and he ran away, and then he died, and so he died a coward's death. Basically, when it comes to the world building of this story, we are looking at a world where there are humans that are battling these alien-like beings known as the Krell. So, in this world, if you become a fighter pilot, I suppose, your job is, whenever there is a threat, is to get into your spaceship and track down and blast away. There's a great depiction of it on the cover, actually. Blast away the Krell. So, apparently, Spencer's dad ran away when he shouldn't have, and he died. Spencer then decides to follow in her father's footsteps by enrolling in the training center to become a fighter herself. And she is treated unfairly from the moment she makes this decision because of the prejudice about her father. So eventually she ends up getting in to the training school, because while the head admiral of the school does not want her there, apparently it comes back down to the teacher themselves. If they are willing to accept a student in their class, they get the final say, and this teacher wants to give Spencer a go. So she does get into the class, and things happen along the way. This is a really good book for anyone who loves Brandon Sanderson, because Brandon Sanderson has his own way of writing books, and if you love Brandon, the only shelf I have fully dedicated to an author is this shelf. It's all Brandon Sanderson. So, you know, I love Brandon Sanderson's writing style. It's not to say that I don't rate Brandon Sanderson books low. I have. There is a book on this shelf that I gave 3 stars to because I did not like it, but I enjoyed this one. If you like sci-fi books that are done in a young adult way, I think you will like this book as well. But even if you don't like sci-fi, I think you'll still like this book. So things happen along the way, and it's just... It took me a hot minute to get into this book, but once I did get into this book, it was a whole lot of fun. And I'm not usually a sci-fi fan, and I love this book, so that is saying quite a lot. And yeah, I highly recommend it. Lots of action, great friendships. Yeah, just a really, really, really good time. But there were some cons to this book, so let's now talk about the 3 spoiler-free cons that I am going to discuss to do with Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. My first con for this book is that it is a very slow beginning. Now, I've read books in the past that take a long time to get to the point. This book doesn't take a long time to get to the point. It probably takes about 2 chapters. In those first 2 chapters, I'm going to try and be succinct here. In those first 2 chapters, there are a ton of sci-fi elements and sci-fi terminology that I needed to wrap my head around. This was not easy for me because I'm not really a sci-fi reader. I've read a few sci-fi books. Some of them were okay. Some of them I did not like at all. So this was tough for me to read, and I started getting to a point by the end of the 2nd chapter where I was thinking, if this continues on, I may be holding the very first Brandon Sanderson book in my hands that I'm going to DNF, and I don't want to because I love Brandon Sanderson so much. But I will say from chapter 3 onwards, it's a really easy read, and yeah, I started enjoying myself from there. But it's a slow read, so expect the first 2 chapters to throw a lot at you in a way that may make you think, if you're not a sci-fi reader, this is not the book for me, but push through because trust me, it is worth it. And I'm not going to say that a book is worth it if it's not, but this book is. It is so much fun to read. My second con is the prejudices surrounding the characters in this book. Now, this is a con where I'm leading more with my heart and my emotions rather than my head and logic, because logically, I understand why the prejudices are there. And I do believe that the prejudices help to ensure a really amazing character arc for our protagonist. However, emotionally, I did not enjoy the prejudices that were mainly pointed towards our main character. I feel like she wasn't really given a fair go because of something that they claimed that her father did. And yeah, that just really upset me for a lot of the time. Spencer is treated very differently to anyone else at the training facility. And yeah, there's something that happens that Spencer finds out about pretty much on night 1 after she's accepted into the facility that is incredibly unfair, especially to a young child, be it a boy or a girl, you know? Especially unfair. And other things that happen along the way where she is judged for something that she didn't do. Logically, I appreciate it. Emotionally, I didn't like it, and that's why it's my second spoiler-free con. My third and final spoiler-free con for this book is, and I have this with a lot of sci-fi, it's the sci-fi jargon. The sci-fi terminology. It's more the jargon than standard terminology. If I have to read the word scud one more time, we're gonna have issues. Now, sci-fi books, at least the ones that I've read so far, whether I loved them or did not love them, because, yeah, I've read a few and I've had mixed feelings about all the sci-fi books I've read. One thing they all have in common is that they'll take out contemporary, everyday jargon and swap it for a term that is more of a science fiction term. Let me give you an example. Let's say that someone were to stab their toe, and in a contemporary they would say, and I'm just going to say this word because it's an example, they were to say, damn it, for example. You won't get that in a sci-fi. No, instead you'll get terminology like sparks, or this one, scud, or stars, or... And it's just really annoying because I find it for me personally, to be very distracting because in my mind, I very vividly see scenes playing out when I'm reading a book, especially plot-driven books, which this one is. I see the main character, I see what it is they're doing, I feel what it is that they're going through, and then in my mind, to use that example again, to me the character is saying, damn it! Instead, they're saying, scud. And it just throws me off every time, and I think scud is probably written maybe like 100 times throughout the course of this book, and I just don't like that about sci-fi in general. So, if sci-fi jargon turns you off, I do need to warn you about that going into this one. It is a sci-fi. I feel this is a blanket thing that happens with all sci-fis, so, you know. But it's something that I don't like, so I'm going to point it out here. But now, let's end my spoiler-free section on a positive note by looking at 3 pros that I have for this book. My first pro for this book is that it is such a fun read from about chapter 3 all the way through to the end of the book, which includes an epilogue at the end, and I'm including that epilogue in the funness of this book. There are funny moments, there are just really enjoyable fun moments, there is a ton of action that I also really enjoyed. I went into this book having no idea what to expect. And then after reading the first 2 chapters, I thought, man, this is a YA sci-fi, and I'm already really anxious about the rest of this book because I'm finding it really hard to keep up. But from chapter 3 onwards, this book really fits the brief for being a YA sci-fi. I love my YA books, and there are people out there who say that YA books aren't proper books, but I completely disagree. This is a book. What do you think this is? A slice of cheese? This is a book. I love my YA books. And it just became so much fun from chapter 3 onwards. That's a massive pro for me, especially with a sci-fi. So, if you are not a sci-fi reader, I think you will still enjoy this book if you can push past chapters 1 and 2. My second pro for this book is a character by the name of Doom Slug. If you've read this book, you know who I'm referring to, and if you haven't, allow me to explain. Doom Slug is a slug. Yeah. A slug that our protagonist Spencer finds, who has a yellow body and blue spikes on its back. Now, I've always been a fan of that colour combination anyway, yellow and blue, but that's not why I love this character. This character is so adorable. One thing I will say about Doomslug is that Doomslug is the type of character who learns by mimicking what others do around them. So, let's say that Spencer's had a hard day, she goes home and she goes to bed, and she goes, "Oh, I've had such a hard day." She's yawning, "Oh, what a hard day." Doomslug will then go, "Oh, what a hard day." And it's just really, really cute. Oh my gosh. Love Doomslug. Never, ever in my life did I think I was going to say I love a character that is a slug. But this slug is so adorable. Oh my gosh. My third and final spoiler-free pro is another character for this book, and that character's name is Mbot. Mbot is the only artificial intelligence character in this entire novel, but Mbot plays a major role throughout this book. I feel like Mbot, if Spencer's the main character, Mbot's like the second main character, the supporting character. And Mbot's, I want to say sense of humor, but I also want to say so much more. Mbot's sense of humor is amazing, but just Mbot. I love Mbot. Mbot really made this book for me. I feel like this book would have been a whole lot drier, or seemingly would have felt drier without Mbot. It's not a dry book by any means, but Mbot really adds to the funness and the joy of this book. So I'm going to tell you about a scene that won't give away any spoilers. It's just an example of the reason why I love Mbot. So there is a time when Spencer is talking to Mbot, and Spencer says to Mbot something that Mbot feels offended by. And Mbot has a response that's something along the lines of, "You know, Spencer, I should feel really offended by this, but I don't have a program in me right now that can show offense in a really good way. So please hold while I go and write up this program and then come back to you and show you how offended I am." So then Mbot proceeds to go away and then come back, and other things have happened in the meantime, but then Mbot comes back and says, "Now, here's what I thought about what you said to me." And Spencer's like, "What?" And Mbot says, "Well, yeah, I told you I'm going to go away and rewrite this so I can show you how I'm offended." And it was just so funny. Oh my gosh, I really love Mbot. My favorite AI character in any sci-fi book is J.V. Cade's Bot Wars, which I have somewhere. Oh, yes, it's in my middle grade section up here. In Bot Wars, there is a character, a robot by the name of Scissors, who I never thought there would be another AI that would rival Scissors. However, Mbot comes extremely close. So I love Mbot. Alright, we're already a long way into this review, so let's jump over to the spoilery section. But to wrap this up for you guys who are going to leave the video here, which I completely understand, I gave this book 4 stars, and I highly recommend this book, whether you love sci-fi or not, to anyone who wants to read just a really fun book. Because that's what this is. It's a really enjoyable book. You just need to read past the first 2 chapters. Highly recommend this book, Brandon Sanderson's Skyward, 4 stars. Let's jump over to the spoilery section, where I talk about the book in a spoilery way. Welcome to the spoilery section of Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. Let's touch upon one of the cons that I had for this book, which was the first 2 chapters. So, as I said, there's a ton of terminology. Brandon Sanderson, I love Brandon Sanderson. I just think he has very slow starts, and sometimes if you don't push through the first chapter or 2, you don't get to the magnificence that is Brandon Sanderson. And this book follows the same routine as that. In the first couple of chapters, while we do get to meet Spencer's dad, and we do have that final interaction between Spencer and her dad, and I did appreciate that, there is a lot of sci-fi terminology and little things like names of aircrafts and science fiction materials and things like that really threw my head for a spin because I'm not a sci-fi person at all. Which is really funny because there are people in my family who love sci-fi. There are people in my family who love science in general. There is a member in my family who has a degree in a sciencey field. So, I mean, I have people who love this stuff in my family, but it's just not my cup of tea. So, I did not appreciate that in the first 2 chapters, that we're introduced to all of these aircrafts at once, and all of these scientific materials and scientific terminology, and it was just, it put me through a tailspin. It really did, and I just did not appreciate that. But once we got into chapter 3, things really seemed to calm down, and it was more focused on the plot rather than the sciencey side of it, which I really appreciated. So I loved seeing Spencer take the test, and to the admissions test, and looking at her, on her left and on her right, to see that these 2 next to her have a completely different test, while she's given a test on something that is not only something she knows nothing about, but is on something that she wasn't even in the class to learn about these things. So you can see right away, this clearly sets up the prejudice that everyone has against Spencer because of something that her father did. Doomslug, to me, anytime Doomslug came up in the book, my heart began to flutter, and I was just glowing with joy, because even though Doomslug is a mimicker of Spencer, she does it, I'm feeling that Doomslug is a she, but if I'm wrong, let me know. She does it in a really cute way. It's just, yeah. I don't like this, said Spencer. I don't like this, said Doombug. I mean, Doomslug, not Doombug. Doomslug. Oh my gosh, she's just so adorable. Now let's talk about Mbot. This was, I feel like Mbot's story couldn't have began at a better time. There were so many things going against Spencer that she wasn't to blame for, all because of the prejudice about her father. And then when she gets told that she can study at the training facility, but she can't stay there. She's not allowed to eat in the cafeteria. She's not allowed to have a bed or a dorm or anything like that. She's there to study, and then when she leaves, as far as they're concerned, she can sleep on the street and then come back the next day. I just found this to be so rude, and while I logically understand why it was in the book and how some people can just go with a prejudice and treat certain people who aren't to blame because of things that other people who are related to them have done, emotionally it just really hurt me that she was allowed to study there, but then she would just be kicked out onto the street while she's not studying, like, at the end of the day. And I just didn't enjoy that. I love that she found the ship that she found, and that she was sleeping in that ship. But then when Mbot, quote unquote, comes to life and starts talking to her, Oh my gosh, I did not expect this at all, and I loved Mbot, and Mbot's very upfront about its limitations, saying, this is not online, this is not online, this is not online, and here's 100 more things that are not online, but these 2 things are online, and I can do this. And by the way, do you have a mushroom? Because I like to analyze mushrooms. That made Mbot even more... Like, Mbot is such a fun character, but it made Mbot even more adorable and gave a personality, or as much as you can give a personality to an AI, to Mbot that was just really adorable. I remember there's a moment in the book, I don't remember what was happening at that time, but something had happened, and Spencer said, "Oh, I have some really good news for you." And Mbot's response was, Do I detect that you may have a mushroom, or maybe 2 mushrooms for me to analyze? It was just so adorable. I love Mbot, and that scene that I was describing earlier where Mbot, when Spencer offends Mbot, and Mbot says, please hold, I don't have a program right now that can sufficiently allow me to express how offended I'm feeling. So please hold, I'm going to go away and write a program specifically so I can show you how offended I am. And then Mbot coming back and being, reacting in an offended way. This was just so good. Then the fact that Mbot was able to infiltrate the radio, the handheld radio that Spencer has, to assist Spencer with her flight simulations, and then also to help Spencer towards the end of the book. I really loved that. I also loved when Spencer was taking Mbot for its first fly around, and okay, so this was interesting. I still don't know who Mbot's former pilot was, and if that was explained, I missed it, so I don't think it was, and I hope it will be explained in Book 2, Starside, which I will read. But one thing that I didn't really know how to feel about it was Mbot continually saying, "No, my pilot has told me to stay low," and I don't know if that means stay low under the ground or if that means stay inconspicuous. I want to know who this pilot is. I think Spencer did really well by saying to Mbot, "But you don't need to do that. Your pilot's not here. Most likely your pilot is dead. So you can go and fly around and be free, quote unquote," and all of that kind of stuff. I did love how Cobb, was it Cobb who ends up riding the ship? And then Mbot says to Spencer, "My pilot said that I am allowed to fly around," or something like that, to basically intimate that Mbot has now chosen Spencer to be its pilot. Any time that any sort of an artificial intelligence is given some sort of representation of feelings, some kind of emotion, it's really, really beautiful, and I loved that scene so much. So let's quickly talk about some of the other characters. I love Cobb. The more I got to learn about Cobb, the more I really love this teacher. I seem to love mentors. A lot of Brandon Sanderson's mentors, whether it's a fantasy or a sci-fi, I just really seem to fall in love with them. All of them seem to have some sort of a tragic backstory that has made them the strong person that they are today. They all seem to have a ton of intelligence, and they all seem to have something that holds them back that makes them even more endearing. And for Cobb, it is not being able to go up in a ship again, because the last time that Cobb did, Cobb had to shoot down one of his comrades, and so he's suffering from a ton of PTSD with this. It's not called PTSD in the book, but it's clear to see that that's what it is. We do find out, thanks to Spencer trying to manipulate Cobb to let her watch the archives of other simulations, other battles that have played out. And Cobb knows what she's doing in the end, which I found hilarious, but he lets her go in anyway. She gets access to the footage of when her father was in his last fight against the Krell to see what happened. Turns out her father wasn't a coward. In fact, and this was a really beautiful moment to find out her father wasn't a coward, but in fact, he was even worse than a coward. So her father decided to fly up further than what the rest of the team were doing, and the top person at the time was even saying, yes, I trust you, go ahead and do that, Ironsides. So he goes off, and the next thing you know, something happens. The Krell play with his mind, and suddenly he is starting to attack his comrades rather than the Krell because they've played with his mind. And because of that, her father has to go down. So it is Cobb who, in fact, is the guy that is charged with taking Spencer's dad down. This adds a lot of complexity to the story that I really appreciated. He is this guy that I personally have come to love and trust, because I just think he's a really good guy. And then we find out he's the one that actually shot down Spencer's dad, but now we know why. Because Spencer's dad seemingly, of his own volition, turned traitor. But that's not in fact what happened. So we also find that out as well. So, along the way, Spencer's gran, nan, something like that. I think it's gran that she calls her. Spencer's gran tells Spencer a ton of stories. And as a young girl, Spencer loved these stories. But the more she's at the flight school, the less she wants to hear these stories. But once she's seen the tape of her father's last day, she goes back to see gran and says, Gran, no more stories. I want to know the truth. What actually happened? This is where we learn about the defect that her father had that made him susceptible to change allegiance thanks to the abilities that the Krell have to play with his mind. And she has the same defect within her, which makes her very nervous to start flying again. We go into the final battle of the book, the final climax of the book, and this does eventually end up happening to Spencer. However, Spencer, she doesn't turn on her comrades, but instead she is able to do something that her gran has always said that she can do, but that everyone else in her family seems to think that it's just a bubba an old wives' tale, and it's not true. And that is, her gran keeps telling her, listen to the stars, because you can actually hear them. So when Spencer was younger, she would look up at the stars and try her best to physically listen out to them. At the climax of the book, Spencer does end up hearing the stars. She can actually hear what they are saying. She can also hear the Krell. And that's when we find out, right at the end, when Spencer does come back down to Earth and is worshipped like a hero. Finally, it took a whole book to happen. She explains to Ironsides that, well, the Krell aren't evil people that are trying to hunt us down and kill us. They're actually prison guards. They're trying to keep us here on Earth because they believe that we as humans are a threat, and that's why they're more just trying to keep us contained rather than trying to take us out. And here we are thinking they're trying to take us out, so we're trying to take them out. I did love the conclusion of this book. I would love to see Spencer have a chat with Gran, and we don't get that, but a chat with Gran post her being able to hear the stars, because I just think that would have been adorable if she could have ran to Gran, given her a hug and said, guess what, Gran, you were right, I can hear the stars. And I just think that would have been beautiful. But in saying that, the epilogue definitely set us up for a really thrilling second book in this series. So far, there are only 2 books published. Skyward Book 1 and Starsight Book 2. But Brandon Sanderson has gone on record as saying that he does plan for this to be a 4-book series. Currently, it's a duology, 2 books, but eventually it's going to be a 4-book series. So we'll see how we go. If you don't know, Brandon Sanderson is the type of guy who his life is basically writing. I literally mean he wakes up, he writes. He eats, he goes to bed, he wakes up, he writes. And the reason we know this is because Brandon Sanderson releases like 3 books a year every single year. So, I mean, it's really hard catching up with all of his works. I love him as an author, but I feel that even if I caught up by the end of this year, next year he would probably release like 50, 60 more books. So, I believe him when he says there's going to be 3 more books in this series, not just Starsight. But I am intrigued to read Starsight because reading chapters 1 and 2, I honestly thought this was going to be the first Brandon Sanderson book that I was going to DNF. I was going to put it down and not read it anymore because it was too much for me. It was way too complicated as a sci-fi. But coming to the conclusion of this book, I'm so glad I pushed through, and I can't wait to read Starsight. I don't know when it's going to go on my TBR, but it will definitely happen before the end of the year, so I'm really looking forward to it. Wrapping this review up, this was a review on Brandon Sanderson's Skyward, a young adult sci-fi that I gave 4 stars to. The beginning was rather slow, and there were other things that I didn't really enjoy along the way, so I had to bump the rating down, but 4 stars is still a really good rating. If anything, I feel like it's more of a 4.5, and I'm really looking forward to the second book in this series. So have you read Brandon Sanderson's Skyward? If you have, let me know what you thought in the comments below. But that is where I am going to leave it. Thank you so much for watching. Peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I'll see you again soon. Bye guys, happy reading, bye!